He thought he was invisible. My daughter's fiancé crept into my study under cover of night, his fingers reaching for the locked drawer where I kept what mattered most. He wasn't stealing from me. He was stealing from her, from the life she trusted him to build with her. But what he didn't know was that I had been waiting all along, hidden in the shadows, watching. Every movement confirmed the truth. This man wasn't a partner, he was a parasite. And in that moment I decided. His betrayal wouldn't just end an engagement, it would end his carefully built facade. He thought he was about to claim a prize. Instead, he had just walked into a trap. Before the story unfolds, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves stories of betrayal and justice. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? The first time I shook Victor's hand, I felt the charm before I heard the words. His grip was confident, but just a touch too firm, the way men squeeze when they want to establish control. He smiled at me the way a salesman smiles at a stranger he plans to manipulate. My daughter Emily, glowing beside him, didn't notice. She looked at him with the blind trust of a woman convinced she had found her future. I saw something else. Beneath his practiced politeness and polished shoes was a hunger, sharp and restless, the kind that doesn't fade after marriage. At the dinner table that night, he performed like an actor in a well-rehearsed play. He complimented the meal, complimented Emily, complimented even the house itself. "Mr. Harris," he said, "you've built such a wonderful home here. Did you design the study yourself? Emily tells me you're meticulous about your office." He said it with casual interest, but his eyes lingered too long on the hallway that led to my private study. I gave him a polite smile, but inside I marked the question. He didn't care about design. He cared about access. Emily's laughter filled the room, breaking the tension I felt. She leaned against his arm, her joy genuine and unguarded. She wanted so badly for me to accept him, to see the man she saw. And I wanted to, for her sake. But experience had sharpened my instincts. In my years as a contractor, I had dealt with men like Victor before. Men who wore expensive watches they couldn't afford. Men who memorized the right words but never the right principles. They could charm a client, flatter a boss, or woo a daughter. But sooner or later their masks cracked. After dessert, while Emily carried dishes into the kitchen, Victor stayed seated across from me. For the first time all evening, his tone shifted. "You must be proud of everything you've built," he said smoothly. His eyes flicking toward the walls adorned with family photographs, vacation memories, and framed newspaper articles about my company's growth. "Emily tells me you've done well for yourself. Real estate, investments, even a little construction empire. That's rare these days." His words were friendly, but the question underneath was obvious. How much was I worth? I kept my face still, my voice calm. "I've worked hard, yes, enough to keep the family comfortable." I didn't elaborate. He wanted details, numbers, the kind of information that could be twisted into leverage later. I gave him nothing. Emily returned, breaking the moment, and Victor immediately shifted back into his polished act. He stood, helped her with the plates, whispered something that made her giggle. To her it was proof of his devotion. To me it was proof of his performance. Every gesture rehearsed, every smile intentional. I knew the type. Over the following weeks, I saw more of him. At family gatherings, at Sunday brunch, at the little events Emily insisted he attend. He always arrived a little overdressed, always with stories that painted him in the best light. He spoke of opportunities, of investments, of how one day he and Emily would take the reins of something larger. He spoke about the future in ways that made my daughter blush. But whenever I pressed him about his own family, his own history, his words grew vague. A father who traveled often. A mother who preferred her privacy. No siblings worth mentioning. His past was a fog, but his ambitions were crystal clear. Then came the first real red flag. It was late one evening after dinner. Emily had gone upstairs to find a photo album she wanted to show him, leaving the two of us alone in the living room. Victor swirled the wine in his glass, leaned back casually, and said, "Mr. Harris, do you ever think about what will happen to all this? I mean the house, the company, the assets. You've built something incredible. It must feel good knowing Emily will inherit it one day." It was phrased as a compliment, but it wasn't. It was a probe. I studied him for a moment before replying, "My estate is in order. Emily will be taken care of." I let the words hang heavy, enough to suggest the conversation was closed, but his eyes glittered with interest, as though he had just confirmed something important. Emily re-entered the room, laughing as she carried the photo album, oblivious to the silent game of chess happening between us. Victor immediately shifted back, slipping his arm around her, pointing at old photos as though he belonged in them. I smiled for Emily's sake, but inside, the unease grew. The following week, I noticed something odd. The door to my study, always closed, always locked, was open by an inch when I returned from the grocery store. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed, but the air felt different. The faint scent of cologne lingered, one that didn't belong to me. Emily and Victor had been over the night before. They had left together, or so I thought. I tested the drawer where I kept my most important documents, property deeds, insurance records, sensitive files no one else needed to see. The lock was still secure, the key still in my possession, but I felt it in my bones. Someone had tried to get in. That night, I replayed the dinner conversation in my mind. Victor's questions, his casual interest in the study, his probing about inheritance. Emily couldn't see it, but I could. He wasn't just after her hand, he was after her future. He wanted the foundation I had spent a lifetime building, the empire meant to protect her, and if I didn't act, he would find a way to take it. I decided to watch him closer, to bide my time, because I knew the truth. Thieves always reveal themselves if you let them believe they're clever enough, and Victor was already too comfortable. He thought his mask was unbreakable. He thought he had fooled me, but the study door told me otherwise. I stood in the dark hallway outside my study, staring at that door ajar by just an inch, and felt the certainty settle like ice in my chest. My daughter's fiancé was testing boundaries, and the next time he wouldn't just test them, he would cross them. The following days passed with a strange quiet. On the surface, everything was normal. Emily called me each morning, cheerful as ever, talking about wedding preparations and asking for my opinion on things I barely understood. Floral arrangements, table settings, color palettes. Her happiness was unshakable, and I wanted so badly to share it. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door ajar, the thin crack of shadow that betrayed a trespass, and in my chest, the unease grew heavier. I told myself maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I'd been careless with the lock. Maybe the air had shifted it open. But deep down I knew better. My house was built on precision. I was the kind of man who checked every latch, every hinge, every bolt. I didn't forget. And if something was wrong, it wasn't because of me. That week, Victor came over again for dinner. Emily was radiant, practically glowing, as she described their plans for the honeymoon. Victor smiled along, his hand resting lightly on hers, but every time she spoke about love or family, his gaze wandered. He looked not at her, but at the walls, the furniture, the framed art I had collected over the years. His eyes weighed things the way an appraiser does, not with appreciation, but calculation. When Emily left to fetch dessert from the kitchen, Victor leaned closer to me. His tone was soft, casual, but the words were anything but. "Mr. Harris," he began, "Emily and I have been talking a lot about the future. We want to make sure we're secure, you know? Weddings are expensive, life is expensive, and it's not always easy for young couples starting out. I was wondering, what advice would you give us? Financially speaking, of course." I studied him in silence for a moment. His posture was relaxed, his expression pleasant, but behind his eyes I saw hunger again. Not for guidance, for information. He wanted numbers, accounts, a glimpse of how much I had and how much he might one day touch. "Work hard," I said evenly. "Save more than you spend, and don't rely on anyone else to build your future." The answer disappointed him. I saw it in the flicker of his smile. He wanted me to volunteer something, a figure, a reassurance that Emily's marriage would come with golden security. But I gave him nothing. Emily returned with dessert, oblivious to the tension between us, and Victor slipped easily back into character, laughing at her jokes, praising her baking, kissing her cheek like a man in love. But my doubt had hardened into something sharper. That night, after they left, I walked into my study again. The lock held, the drawer still sealed, but I could almost feel the weight of his curiosity pressing against it. He wasn't done, I knew it, and neither was I. In the quiet hours that followed, I thought about my late wife, about the promises I had made when Emily was born. I had sworn to protect her, to give her a life of stability and safety, no matter the cost. She had been my wife's final request before illness claimed her, that Emily should never know struggle or fear. And now, years later, I faced a threat I had never anticipated. Not from strangers, but from the man who had promised to love my daughter. I thought about the legacy I had built. The company that had started with one truck and a borrowed tool set, the house I had designed with my own hands, the careful investments I had made so that Emily would never have to live the way I had in my youth. All of it could be undone by one smooth-talking opportunist if I wasn't careful. And the worst part? Emily couldn't see it. Love had blinded her. She saw devotion where I saw manipulation. She saw a partner where I saw a parasite. The next day, I tested him. I invited them both to lunch at a restaurant downtown, one that Victor had boasted about knowing the owner of. I wanted to see him in his element, away from Emily's protective glow. The moment we sat down, he took control of the conversation. He bragged about his connections, about deals he had almost closed, about opportunities he was considering. The stories were grand, but the details never added up. I asked quiet questions, probing, and each answer contradicted something he'd said before. His confidence faltered when pressed. Emily laughed through it all, proud to show him off, unaware that every word tightened the knot of suspicion inside me. To her, his bravado was exciting. To me, it was theater, and poor theater at that. Later, when the bill arrived, Victor reached for it with a flourish, but hesitated just long enough for me to notice. His card went down reluctantly, his smile forced. I caught a glimpse of the receipt after he signed. Declined once, accepted on the second attempt. The performance was crumbling at the edges. That evening I sat alone in my study, the locked drawer under my hand, and asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Was I willing to risk Emily's heartbreak to protect her future? Or would I let her learn the truth the hard way? The doubt gnawed at me. If I exposed him too soon, she might hate me for it. If I waited too long, he might succeed in taking what wasn't his. But my doubt turned into certainty when I noticed something else. The next time Victor visited, I found a faint scratch near the drawer's lock. Small, almost invisible but fresh. Someone had tried to force it. My hands clenched into fists as I stared at it. The mask was slipping, and Victor was no longer careful. That night, as the house settled into silence, I stood in the doorway of my study, the faint moonlight spilling across the floorboards. The drawer gleamed faintly in the dark, waiting. Somewhere in the distance a car door shut. And in that moment, I knew. The thief would return, and when he did, I would be ready. The study had always been more than just a room. It was the heart of my house. The place where I kept not only the documents that proved what I had built, but the history of my family as well. Every contract I had ever signed, every deed to every property, every insurance policy and tax record, all of it rested inside that heavy oak drawer, sealed with a lock that had never failed me. But there were other things too. Letters from my late wife, photographs that Emily had drawn as a child, keepsakes that meant nothing to anyone else but meant everything to me. That drawer wasn't just storage. It was trust, legacy, and memory, condensed into a single locked box. Now I looked at it differently. The scratch on the brass plate glared back at me like a wound. Someone had tried to pry their way into the life I had guarded for decades, and the only person who had been in that room recently was Victor. He hadn't succeeded yet, but the attempt was enough. It was proof that his interest in Emily was tangled with something far more dangerous: my wealth. I sat in my leather chair that evening, the drawer just inches from my knees, and tried to imagine what his plan had been. Did he think he would stumble upon bank records he could use to pressure Emily? Did he believe there was cash hidden away, something quick and easy to take? Or was he after something larger, proof of assets he could one day claim once the ring was on my daughter's finger? Whatever it was, he was willing to risk exposure for it, and that meant desperation. I thought about how best to respond. My instinct was to protect, to reinforce the lock, to move the papers to a safety deposit box downtown. But another part of me, the colder, more calculating part, saw an opportunity. Thieves always returned. If I moved the prize, he would never reveal himself. But if I let it stay where it was, if I let him think the temptation remained, then his greed would betray him. And when it did, I would be waiting. The decision settled on me like a weight. I would not remove the drawer's contents. Instead, I would prepare. That night, I installed a discreet camera in the corner of the study, hidden behind a row of books. Its lens had a clear view of the desk and drawer, and its sensor was sensitive enough to capture even the smallest movement. Then I set up a second measure, a motion detector that sent an alert directly to my phone. If anyone entered the study while I was away, I would know instantly. The following weekend, Victor visited again. Emily insisted he help her organize some of her belongings that she planned to move after the wedding. They spent the afternoon in her room upstairs, laughing, packing boxes, the sound of her joy drifting down the hallway like music. But when I stepped into the study later that evening, I noticed the faintest shift in the air. The rug in front of the desk had been moved half an inch. A chair that had been angled toward the window was now facing the drawer. He had been here again, testing, measuring, maybe even practicing. I sat in the dim light, my hands resting on the arms of the chair, and stared at the drawer as though it might speak. For years it had been nothing more than wood and metal. Now it was bait, and in the silence of the room I realized something chilling. The thief I was waiting for wasn't just trying to steal money. He was trying to steal my daughter's future, her trust, her very sense of security. If he succeeded, it wouldn't just be financial damage. It would be a wound that might never heal. The thought twisted inside me until it hardened into resolve. I would not confront him yet. Not until I had proof strong enough to shatter his mask in front of Emily. She loved him too much to believe words alone. She needed to see what I saw. She needed to hear it, undeniable and cold. And I would give her that. The following week was a test of patience. I went about my days as though nothing had changed. I visited construction sites, checked in with clients, met with old colleagues. But every night, when the house was silent, I returned to the study. I checked the lock. I reviewed the camera feed. I waited. And with each passing day, the certainty grew stronger. He would come back. His kind always did. One evening, as I sat with Emily over coffee, Victor arrived unexpectedly. He breezed in with a grin, carrying a bottle of wine as though generosity flowed through his veins. Emily lit up, kissing his cheek, while I observed from the other side of the table. He asked questions again, little ones masked as conversation. "Mr. Harris, how long did it take you to build this place? Did you manage it all yourself, or did you hire an architect? Must have cost a fortune." I gave him polite, empty answers, all while watching his eyes. He wasn't interested in stories. He was mapping, measuring, calculating. And I knew then, with absolute clarity, his smile was just another tool. Later that night, after they left, I stood in the doorway of my study once more. The moonlight spilled across the polished wood, glinting off the brass handle of the drawer. My reflection stared back at me from its glossy surface, but I wasn't looking at myself. I was looking for him. It happened 3 nights later. The motion alert buzzed on my phone at 11:46 p.m. I was in the den, half asleep in my chair, when the vibration jolted me awake. My heart hammered as I opened the feed from the hidden camera. There he was, Victor, standing in my study. His face calm, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object, and crouched in front of the drawer. A key. My blood turned cold. He had managed to copy it somehow. My drawer, my life, was seconds from being laid open. And as I stared at the glowing screen, I realized something else. It wasn't just about what he would take. It was about what I would do when he finally crossed the line. The thief had returned, and this time he wasn't going to walk away unseen. I had been waiting for this moment. Nights of unease, weeks of suspicion, all of it had led here. My phone screen glowed in the dark, showing Victor kneeling at the drawer, his shoulders tense, his hands precise. He wasn't fumbling like a nervous intruder. He was calm, practiced, as though he had rehearsed this in his mind a dozen times. That calm told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't curious. He wasn't stumbling into temptation. He had planned this. He pulled a small key from his pocket. Its metallic gleam caught by the faint moonlight from the study window. My pulse quickened. He had found a way to copy mine. Maybe he'd stolen it for a day. Maybe he'd paid someone to replicate it, but the result was the same. He believed he held the skeleton key to my life. The camera feed showed his hand trembling slightly as he slid the key into the lock. He hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the door, his ears straining for sound. The house was silent, and I made sure it stayed that way. I held my breath as if he could somehow hear it from across the hall. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned the key. The soft click echoed in my chest like thunder. Victor exhaled, a smile flickering across his lips as he slid the drawer open. Papers rustled under his hands. He lifted folders, leafing through them quickly, his eyes scanning for numbers, for proof, for wealth. He muttered to himself in a low voice, too quiet for the microphone to catch every word, but I recognized the tone. Greed. I leaned closer to the screen, my jaw clenched. He lingered over property deeds, nodded slightly when he saw bank account statements. His lips curled into a grin when he discovered investment records. He whispered something, "She'll never know," before carefully folding one document into his pocket. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from a cold, measured certainty. I finally had him. The camera caught every detail, the theft, the intent, the deception. Proof strong enough to shatter his act forever. But I didn't move. Not yet. My instinct screamed to storm into the study, to drag him out by his collar and demand he look me in the eye. But that would have been a mistake. Confrontation gave him room to lie, to twist the story, to charm Emily into believing I had overreacted. No. What I needed wasn't anger. It was evidence, and now I had it. I let the recording run as Victor rifled through more documents. He spent almost 20 minutes inside that drawer, each second another nail in the coffin he was building for himself. Finally, he slid the drawer shut, turned the key, and slipped it back into his pocket. He smoothed his hair, adjusted his jacket, and left the study with the same smug calm he had entered. I sat in the dark den, staring at the frozen image on my screen long after he disappeared. The thief had crossed the line. He had stolen from me. Worse, he had stolen from the daughter who trusted him. And though he didn't know it yet, he had also signed his own downfall. The following morning, Emily called as usual, her voice bright, her words full of wedding details. She told me how Victor had been working late nights, how dedicated he was to building their future. I listened quietly, my heart heavy. She couldn't see what I saw. She didn't hear his whispers in the study. She didn't see his grin as he pocketed stolen documents. To her, he was still the man of her dreams. To me, he was already a condemned man. Over the next few days, I played my role carefully. I invited them both for dinner again, smiled when Victor offered to help with the dishes, laughed at his rehearsed stories. But every time I looked at him, I no longer saw the polished mask. I saw the man hunched over my drawer, the thief with a copied key, the parasite feeding on my daughter's future. And each time I smiled, it wasn't warmth. It was the calm of a predator waiting to strike. At night, I watched the recording again and again, memorizing every detail. The way his hands lingered too long on bank statements, the way his face lit up when he found what he wanted, the way he whispered as if savoring the taste of betrayal. Each frame was a weapon now, and I sharpened it in my mind until it gleamed like steel. But watching wasn't enough. I needed to be sure this wasn't a single act of curiosity, a one-time lapse in judgment. I needed proof of pattern, of intent, so I baited him. I left new folders in the drawer, fresh documents that hinted at larger accounts, at hidden assets, at wealth just beyond his reach, each one carefully designed to tempt him deeper, to make him bolder. It didn't take long. 3 nights later, the motion alert buzzed again. At midnight, Victor entered the study once more. The same calm, the same copied key, the same greedy hands. But this time, he stayed longer. He copied account numbers onto a small notepad. He snapped photos of deeds with his phone, and then, with a grin that chilled me, he whispered, "Soon." The word hung in the air, captured by the microphone. Undeniable. Soon. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The trap was working. The thief was tightening the noose around his own neck, one greedy act at a time. And as I watched him leave the study, unaware that his betrayal was etched into memory, I felt no anger, only cold patience, because I knew the end was coming. The thief believed he was hunting treasure, but in truth, he was the one being hunted. Once you know the truth about a man, every smile becomes a mask, every gesture a performance, every word a strategy. That was how I began to see Victor. The young man who once charmed my daughter with stories and smooth compliments now appeared as nothing more than an actor stumbling through a script. His timing was still practiced, his delivery still polished, but I knew where the seams were now. I had seen what lay behind the curtain, and yet I said nothing. I smiled when Emily talked about wedding venues. I nodded when Victor asked about my company. I even laughed at his jokes. But underneath the calm surface I was building something, a stage of my own, a place where his mask would finally crack, not just for me, but for Emily. Because if I confronted him alone, she would never believe me. She needed to hear him with her own ears, see him with her own eyes, and for that I had to tighten the trap. The first step was conversation. I began dropping subtle hints in his presence, little fragments of information designed to draw out his greed. At dinner one evening, I mentioned a new account I had opened, one that was meant for long-term security. I didn't give numbers, didn't give details, just a vague suggestion that there was more wealth tucked away. His eyes flickered instantly, his smile just a shade too wide. I knew the bait had landed. The second step was temptation. I left new folders in the drawer, filled with carefully crafted documents, mock investment records, draft contracts, even a forged letter hinting at offshore assets. They were convincing enough to whet his appetite, but meaningless, if ever used. Each time I checked the camera feed, I found signs he had been there again. He copied numbers, photographed pages, whispered to himself in excitement. Each act deeper than the last, each step a chain locking around him. But the third step was the most important: interaction. I started pressing him lightly, testing his responses. Over coffee one morning, I asked about his work, about how he planned to provide for Emily. His answers were vague at first, then defensive. He shifted quickly to charm, talking about opportunities, about deals in progress. But I saw his jaw tighten when I asked real questions. He wasn't used to scrutiny. He was used to admiration. At another dinner, I mentioned how Emily deserved a partner who could protect her, someone strong enough to shield her from the world's dangers. He smiled politely, but his eyes narrowed. He didn't like the implication. Good, let the mask strain. Emily, of course, noticed none of this. To her, Victor was still the attentive fiancé, the man who opened doors and held her hand, the man who promised her a glittering future. And I let her keep that illusion for now, because when the fall came, it would be sharper if she saw just how well he had lied. One evening, Victor made his boldest move yet. He pulled me aside while Emily was upstairs, his voice low, his expression carefully crafted into concern. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I wanted to talk to you man to man. You've built so much, and Emily and I, well, we want to make sure we're starting on the right foot. Weddings are expensive, life is expensive. I was wondering if you'd consider helping us out. Not a handout, of course, just a gesture. An investment in our future." The words were smooth, but the meaning was poison. He wasn't asking. He was testing. Testing how much he could pull before the mask slipped completely. I studied him in silence, letting the weight of the pause stretch. He shifted slightly, his confidence faltering under the quiet. Finally, I said, "Emily's future is already secure. But security isn't built on gestures. It's built on honesty." His smile froze. For just an instant, his mask cracked, revealing the frustration beneath. Then Emily returned, and he slipped it back on as if nothing had happened. That night I reviewed the recordings again. His theft attempts had grown frequent, 3 times in a single week. Each time he lingered longer, his whispers bolder. "Almost there," he muttered once. "Just a little more." The words chilled me, not because of their content, but because of their confidence. He believed he was winning. He believed the prize was almost in his hands. Good. Let him believe it. The higher he climbed on lies, the harder the fall would be. Meanwhile, I began preparing Emily's heart for the truth. Not directly. She wouldn't have listened, but through questions. I asked her if Victor ever spoke about his own family. She admitted he rarely did. I asked her if he ever shared his financial situation. She hesitated, then confessed he preferred not to. Each question planted a seed of doubt, small at first, but growing. She defended him, of course, but her voice lacked the absolute certainty it once carried. One afternoon, I drove her to the park where her mother used to take her as a child. As we walked the familiar paths, I spoke carefully. "Emily," I said, "love is a gift, but trust is a responsibility. A man who truly loves you will never keep secrets that could harm you. Remember that." She smiled faintly, nodding, but I saw the flicker of thought in her eyes. A seed planted, a seed waiting. By the end of that week, the trap was nearly closed. Victor had taken the bait deeper than I expected. He had copied fake numbers, pocketed false documents, whispered promises of wealth to himself in the dark. He believed he was clever. He believed he was hidden. But I was the one watching. I was the one recording. The final step was timing. I needed him to be exposed not in whispers, not in shadows, but in front of Emily herself. A private confrontation could be denied, twisted, explained away. A public unmasking could not. And so I planned the dinner. A family gathering, warm and welcoming, with Victor seated at my table. He would smile, he would perform, he would charm. And then, when the moment was right, I would show her who he truly was. The plan was set. The evidence was ready. And as I locked the study drawer one final time, I whispered to the silence, "Come back one more time, Victor. Just one more. and the show will be over." The house groaned softly in the night as though it understood. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, rattling the windows with a quiet urgency, and I knew the stage was ready. The thief believed. He was safe, but the walls around him were already closing in. The night of the dinner arrived like a storm cloud on a clear horizon. To Emily, it was nothing more than a family gathering, an evening to celebrate her upcoming marriage with laughter and wine. To Victor, it was an opportunity to cement his place in the family, to impress, to charm, to weave his web tighter around my daughter's heart. But to me, it was the stage I had been preparing for weeks. The room was my theater, the table my stage, and Victor was walking directly into the role I had written for him. The dining room glowed with warm light. A long table stretched between us, set with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and candles flickering softly. Emily had chosen the wine, fussed over the seating, arranged the flowers. She wanted everything perfect, and she believed it was. She moved gracefully between kitchen and table, humming with happiness, while Victor sat at the head of the table beside her, his smile easy, his posture relaxed. He looked the part of the devoted fiancé. His suit was sharp, his words smooth, his gestures affectionate. He complimented Emily's dress, praised the meal, toasted to family. He played the perfect man, and to anyone else it might have been convincing. But to me, every word was another line in the script I'd already read. I watched him closely as the evening unfolded. He spoke at length about his business opportunities, grand ventures that shimmered with promise but lacked substance. Emily listened in awe, her eyes shining with admiration, while I listened with cold silence. His words were a house of cards, flimsy and fragile, ready to collapse under the weight of truth. Between courses, I decided to prod him. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but deliberate. "Victor," I said, "you've spoken a lot about the future. Tell me, how do you plan to protect Emily?"
Not just with love, but with stability.
Marriage is more than flowers and dinners. It's about trust, security, and honesty. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes flickered, just for a moment. "Of course, Mr. Harris, that's exactly what I want for Emily. She deserves the best, and I'll make sure she has it." I nodded slowly. "Good. Because a man's character isn't measured by his promises. It's measured by his choices when no one is watching." The silence hung heavy for a second too long. Emily, unaware of the weight in my words, laughed lightly and tried to smooth it over. "Dad, don't grill him. We've been planning non-stop. He's exhausted already." She placed her hand over Victor's, reassuring, while he offered me a polite chuckle. But behind his smile I saw the flash of irritation. He had understood my meaning. As dinner continued, I baited him again. Casually, I mentioned that I had been reviewing some old accounts in my study, making sure everything was organized before the wedding. I let the words slip out as though they were unimportant, and then I watched him. His hand tightened slightly around his glass. His smile froze for a heartbeat before he forced it back into place. Emily didn't notice, but I did. Dessert arrived, a rich chocolate cake that Emily had baked herself. Victor took the first bite, exaggerating his praise, making her beam with pride. He leaned close, whispering something that made her laugh. But when she looked away, his expression shifted, just for a second. He glanced toward me, his smile fading into something colder, something sharper. He knew I was watching him, and he didn't like it. I raised my glass, breaking the tension. "To family," I said evenly. "May it always stand stronger than betrayal." Emily laughed again, clinking her glass against mine. Victor followed, his smile stretched thin, his voice steady but hollow. "To family," he echoed. The candles flickered as the night deepened, their flames casting long shadows across the walls. The dining room felt smaller, tighter, as though the house itself sensed what was coming. I sat calmly, my expression unreadable, while inside I measured every second, every glance, every twitch of his jaw. By the end of the evening, Emily was glowing with joy, convinced the night had been perfect. She kissed Victor softly, thanked me for hosting, and began clearing the plates. Victor rose to help her, his hands gentle, his voice affectionate. To her it was love. To me, it was theater. When the dishes were done and Emily stepped into the kitchen, Victor lingered near the table, his eyes finding mine. For the first time all evening the mask slipped. His smile faded, his gaze hardened, and in a low voice only I could hear, he said, "You don't trust me, do you?" I held his stare, my voice calm. "Trust is earned, not stolen." His jaw tightened, but before he could reply, Emily returned, her laughter cutting through the tension. He slipped the mask back on instantly, smiling, wrapping his arm around her as though nothing had happened. But I had seen the truth. The actor was tired. The performance was cracking, and very soon the stage would collapse beneath him. That night, after they left, I walked into my study once more. The drawer sat there, locked and silent, waiting. I placed my hand on it, feeling the weight of the moment pressing closer. The evidence was ready. The performance was nearly over, and when the curtain finally fell, it would not just expose him. It would destroy him. The living room was quiet when I invited them over again, just 3 nights after the dinner. Emily thought it was another casual evening, a chance to plan the wedding details with her fiancé. She arrived in a soft blue dress, her hair pulled back, her smile radiant. Victor wore his usual confidence like armor, his suit immaculate, his charm ready. But the house itself seemed to sense the shift. The lamps glowed lower, the shadows stretched longer, and there was a sharpness in the air, like a storm waiting to break. I had prepared this night carefully. Every word, every movement, every silence was part of the trap. Tonight, there would be no more games. Tonight the mask would be torn away. We sat together in the living room. Emily leaned against Victor, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. He looked the picture of devotion, his fingers brushing hers lightly, his voice soft and affectionate when he spoke to her. I let them settle into the illusion, let them believe the play was still going according to their script. Then I stood. "Before we dive into wedding plans," I said evenly, "there's something I need to share with both of you." Emily blinked, her smile fading slightly. "Dad, what is it?" Victor didn't move, but I saw the subtle tightening of his jaw. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, barely perceptible, but I had learned to watch for these cracks. I walked slowly to my study, leaving them in the silence, and returned with a small black device in my hand. My phone. I set it on the table between us, the weight of it heavier than any weapon. Emily tilted her head. "What's this?" Victor's smile didn't falter, but his fingers twitched once against his knee. He already knew. "Something you both need to hear," I replied. My voice was calm, deliberate. The voice of a man who has waited for the perfect moment to strike. I pressed play. The room filled with the sound of shuffling papers. Then Victor's voice, clear and sharp, captured from that night he thought he was alone in my study. "The old man has everything just sitting here. Accounts, deeds, valuations. Emily will never know if I move quickly. By the time she finds out, we'll already be free." The words hung in the air like poison. Emily froze, her face drained of color, her hand slipping from his arm. Her eyes darted from the phone to Victor, then back to me, searching for some explanation, some lifeline to hold on to. Victor's smile cracked. His mask slipped, and for the first time, the polished fiancé looked cornered. That's not what it sounds like," he stammered. "You don't understand the context, but I wasn't finished." I let the recording continue. His voice grew bolder, more venomous. "She's too naive to see it. He trusts me already. Soon, everything he has will be mine. And she'll thank me for it." Emily gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. The sound of betrayal in her ears, spoken by the man she thought she loved, broke something inside her. Tears welled, but her eyes never left his face. Victor's composure collapsed. His charm was gone, his smile vanished. He leaned forward, his tone sharp, defensive. "Emily, you can't believe this. He's twisting it. He's been against me from the start, always trying to turn you away from me. He probably doctored that recording." I met his eyes coldly. "Doctoring doesn't explain the exact words you spoke. In my house, while you thought no one was listening." Emily shook her head, her voice trembling. "Victor, tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't—" Victor grabbed her hand, his desperation bleeding through. "Emily, listen to me. He's manipulating you. He's always been controlling, always doubted me because he can't stand the idea of you choosing your own life. He's doing this because he doesn't want to let you go." Her hand slipped from his grasp. She pulled back, her eyes wide, her breath shaky. "No, Victor, that's your voice. Those are your words. You were planning to use me." The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with betrayal, with the raw truth laid bare. Victor looked at her, then at me, his eyes burning with anger now, stripped of pretense. "You think you've won," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You think exposing me will protect her? You've just destroyed her. Do you understand? She believed in me. She loved me. And now she'll never trust anyone again. Emily flinched at his words, her tears falling freely now. But her voice, though broken, was firm. "Get out, Victor. Get out of this house. Get out of my life." For a moment, I thought he might lash out, that the mask he had worn so carefully would shatter into violence. But instead he stood, his face twisted with fury. He looked at me one last time, his words dripping with venom. "This isn't over, old man. You may have stopped me tonight, but you've ruined her, and you'll live with that." He stormed toward the door, his footsteps heavy, the slam of the door echoing through the house like the crack of a gavel. The silence that followed was unbearable. Emily sat motionless on the couch, her eyes staring at nothing, her body trembling. I moved toward her slowly, carefully, like approaching someone wounded. She turned to me finally, her voice breaking. "How could I not see it, Dad? How could I be so blind?" I placed my hand gently over hers. "Because you trusted. And trust is not a weakness, Emily. It's what makes us human. His betrayal doesn't define you. It defines him." But her tears didn't stop. She leaned into me, sobbing softly while I held her, my heart heavy. I had protected her from the thief, but in doing so I had shattered her illusions. The man she thought she loved was gone, revealed as nothing more than a liar, a predator. And though I knew it was necessary, I also knew this wound would not heal quickly. I looked at the door Victor had slammed shut and felt the certainty settle in my chest. He was gone from our home, from her life, but not from the shadows. His pride had been wounded, his schemes destroyed. And men like him did not vanish quietly. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of what he might try next. The days after the unmasking were thick with silence. Emily moved through the house like a shadow, her laughter gone, her spirit dulled by betrayal. I gave her space, but I stayed close. She needed to heal, and healing takes time, but I never allowed myself to relax. Men like Victor don't disappear. They retreat, they regroup, and then they strike again, desperate to reclaim what they lost. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came back. Not for Emily, not for love, but for revenge. It began with the phone calls. At first, they were silent. Late at night, just the sound of breathing on the other end. Then came the messages, each one more venomous than the last. "You ruined me. She'll hate you when she learns the truth. This isn't over." Emily never saw them. I made sure of that. I intercepted the calls, deleted the messages, absorbed the poison so she wouldn't have to. But every word only sharpened my resolve. Victor thought he could crawl back into our lives through threats and shadows. He was wrong. One evening, just as the sun slipped beneath the horizon and the house filled with dusk, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Emily was upstairs, her door closed, lost in her own thoughts. I moved to the front window, and there he was. Victor. He stepped out of the car with the arrogance of a man who believed he still had power. His suit was gone, replaced by dark clothes. His smile was gone, too, replaced with something harder, something dangerous. In his hand he carried a folder. I didn't need to see inside it to know what it contained. Lies, threats, fabricated evidence meant to twist Emily against me. He rang the bell once, then twice, his impatience ringing through the halls. When I opened the door, his eyes met mine, cold and sharp. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was low, steady. Too steady. I stepped aside just enough to block his path. "You have nothing left to say here, Victor." His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "That's where you're wrong. You think you destroyed me, but all you did was give me more reason to fight. Emily still loves me. And if she hears the right story, if she sees the right documents, she'll come back. To me, not you." His arrogance might have been laughable if not for the danger behind it. He really believed he could rewrite the truth, twist her grief into doubt, and claw his way back into her life. "Emily knows who you are now," I said calmly. "There's no story you can tell, no paper you can wave, that will erase the truth she heard with her own ears." He held up the folder, shaking it slightly. "You underestimate me. I've dealt with people like you before, stubborn old men who think they're too smart to lose. They all fell eventually. So will you." The urge to throw him off the porch, to end it with force, pulsed hot in my veins. But rage wasn't my weapon. Patience was. Strategy was. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. I opened the door wider. "Come in, Victor. Let's finish this." His surprise flashed for just a second before he smirked and stepped inside. He thought he'd won something by crossing that threshold. He had no idea he was walking into his final act. I led him into the study, the very room where his betrayal had first revealed itself. The air was heavy with memory, with the ghost of his voice echoing through that first recording. He set the folder on the desk with theatrical care, spreading the papers as though they were weapons. "Here's how this works," he began, his voice sharp. "You tell Emily you misunderstood me. You tell her you manipulated the recording, twisted my words, and in return I walk away quietly. No police, no lawsuits, no scandals, just silence." I let him finish, let the arrogance spill out of him like poison draining from a wound. Then I reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a small black device, and placed it beside his folder. Another recorder. I pressed play. The room filled once more with his voice, not from weeks ago, but from just minutes earlier at the front door. "Emily still loves me, and if she hears the right story, if she sees the right documents, she'll come back. To me, not you." His face went pale. He looked at the device, then at me, then back at the device. For once the mask was gone entirely. No charm, no confidence, only raw panic. You can't." "I already have," I said coldly. "Every word you've spoken since you pulled into my driveway is now recorded. The threats, the manipulation, the attempt to rewrite the truth. It's all here. And this time Emily will hear it from the start." He lunged for the recorder, his hand outstretched, but I was faster. I closed my hand over it, my grip like iron, and stared him down. "It's over, Victor. You don't own her, you don't own me, and you'll never own a piece of this family." The rage boiled over in his eyes. For a moment I thought he might strike me, lash out in desperation, but then he froze, his breath heavy, his body trembling with the weight of his own collapse. Slowly, he stepped back, his hands shaking, his voice breaking. "You've destroyed me," he whispered. "No," I said, my voice low and final. "You destroyed yourself. I just gave you the stage." The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally he gathered his papers, his movements clumsy, his eyes burning with hate. Without another word he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, his footsteps retreating into the night. I stood there for a long time, the recorder still in my hand, the echoes of his failure still hanging in the air. Emily appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying, her voice soft but steady. "Dad, was that him?" I nodded slowly. "It was. And it's over now." She stepped into the room, her hand slipping into mine. "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just save me. You saved my future." I squeezed her hand gently, my heart heavy but certain. "You don't owe me thanks. You just owe yourself the promise that you'll never let someone like him fool you again." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, but there was strength in her eyes now. The kind of strength that comes from surviving betrayal, from facing the truth and walking through it. That night, as the house grew quiet and Emily finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I sat alone in my study. The drawer was still locked, the papers still untouched, the secrets still guarded. But the war was over. Victor had been unmasked, broken, and cast out. Emily was safe. The house was mine again, not just in bricks and wood, but in peace and trust. And as the silence wrapped around me, I realized something else. Sometimes victory isn't about destroying the enemy. Sometimes it's about showing them they never had power to begin with. And so the mask was shattered, the thief cast out, and the family reclaimed its peace. But victory always leaves questions lingering in the silence. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves tales of betrayal and justice. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now I ask you, what do you think truly destroyed Victor? Was it Alan's strategy or Victor's own arrogance? Tell me in the comments below. I read every answer and I want to know where you stand.